Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelly Duggan. I'm a professor of management and leadership at Georgian College, and I'm also the digital innovation change lead at the college. And on behalf of Lakehead University and Georgian College, it is my pleasure to host our discussion today. In a moment, I'll introduce our speaker and tell you a little bit about how our agenda will flow, including ways that you can interact and join the discussion through the chat. This event will be recorded and posted on the Executive Leadership webpage. We'd like to set a tone that this will be a less formal presentation and more of a fireside chat. This is some time that you're setting aside for yourself, and we're so happy you've joined us. And we really want you to feel engaged and have the opportunity to ask questions. But first, I would like to invite one of our student leaders, Sarah Ortiz, our VP of Equity and Inclusion with the Georgian College Students Association, to recite the land acknowledgement.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Both Lakehead University and Georgian College acknowledge that they are situated on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples. All campuses of Georgian College and Lakehead Aurelius campus are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. The Anishinaabe include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. Lakehead University in Thunder Bay is located on the traditional territory of the Fort Williams First Nation, signatory to the Robinson Superior Treaty of 1850. Both Georgian College and Lakehead University are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We're excited to see such a great turnout for this event and welcome such a diverse audience. We have well over 20 organizations represented and from very diverse leadership backgrounds. You're here because you're committed to your personal learning and growth, and you're likely passionate about building stronger, more empowered, and resilient workplaces. So we want to welcome, I'm just going to name a few organizations. We have folks from municipalities, counties, County of Simcoe, Grey County. We have CFB Borden, we have healthcare representatives, and lots of reps from the education sector, from school boards to higher ed. We have our Georgian colleagues and our Lakehead colleagues, the YMCA, family and youth services. So leaders from many different sectors of our community. And whether we're leading organizations, departments, teams, or classrooms, or maybe families, the fundamentals remain the same, and that is that relationships matter. So today's discussion is centered around one question, and that is, how can we cultivate a workplace that connects people to their jobs and to their colleagues, particularly during a pandemic? We've all been challenged this past year, and our notions of leadership are causing us to get curious and maybe develop some new skills. We've all been challenged to develop new skills this year, and this is a great time for us to pause and reflect on both the theories and the practical application of leadership approaches that will fuel our organizations in the future. And so I invite you all to maybe set a little intention for the next hour. You've set aside some time for yourself, for your personal learning and growth, and jot down for yourself maybe a couple of little goals or takeaways or intentions that you have for this next hour. Take a deep breath and enjoy the discussion. We'll begin by hearing from Dr. David Richards, who I'll introduce in a moment. During the presentation, we may pause periodically to field questions, and you can submit your questions in the chat. We'll roll those up and throughout the presentation pause, and we'll most certainly spend the last 15 minutes or so to do a little Q&A after the presentation. As we are learning in this virtual world, we're learning so much about how to engage meaningfully in a distant virtual way. And so we really appreciate your engagement by submitting questions and reflections in the chat. Remember that we're all learning together, so your input is valuable. And the best leaders are also the best learners. So we really are grateful for your participation today. So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce Dr. David Richards. David is the Dean of the Faculty of Business Administration at Lakehead University. He joined the Faculty of Business Admin in 2008 as a faculty member, teaching human resources and organizational behavior. Dr. Richards is a doctor of philosophy in business administration and also holds master's degrees in business administration and social work, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology and gerontology. This is an incredible background for us to learn from. Prior to pursuing an academic career, Dr. Richards worked for a number of years in healthcare and social services as a clinician and a manager. His research investigates attachment theory in the workplace, leadership and leader-follower relationships, emotional regulation, and how these factors relate to attitudes and work behaviors. We are so grateful to have him with us today to share his research findings and to help us engage in a reflection about our own leadership development. Dr. Richards, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Kelly, for that warm introduction. And thank you, Sarah, for the land acknowledgement. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone is seeing my slides. Yes, I did just want to say how happy I am to be here and to have this opportunity to talk about a topic that I'm very excited and passionate about. I also, Kelly gave you a bit of background about my experience, and I won't repeat that, but what I will say is that my experience as a clinician and a manager, and there was some overlap there, led me to believe or to observe that the dynamics I had been seeing in some of the couples and families that I had been treating were not dissimilar to some of the dynamics I was seeing in the workplace when coworkers and employees were having conflict. And so when I went back to school, I thought perhaps there's an opportunity for us to learn a little bit from other aspects of psychology and to help us better understand work relationships. So today I'll speak to you about a few of those topics, and I'm looking forward to having some discussion later in the session. Yeah, so here's a bit of an overview. I want to talk a little bit about some essentials with respect to leadership, and also to talk about leader-member exchange and the importance of those work relationships. I'll spend a little bit of time talking about individual differences, emotions, and personality, and then we'll spend some time talking about this concept of organizational citizenship behavior. And then I'll wrap things up with a brief discussion about what do we do now in this current environment. So when it comes to leadership essentials, early leadership studies at Ohio State and Michigan State universities identified the importance that leaders should be engaged in two types of behavior. So what is interesting to me with these studies back in the early 1950s was that they were done independently but resulted in similar outcomes. Basically, these two leadership studies found that leaders need to focus both on the task or job-related aspects, and then also the people-focused aspects of the workplace. So leaders need to provide specific instruction, setting expectations, providing direction, making sure that employees have the resources they need, and similar and related behaviors that would enable employees to do the things that they need to do to accomplish their job. Leaders also need to pay attention to relationships and show consideration and concern for the well-being of employees. Yuko later expanded upon those two aspects into a hierarchical taxonomy of leadership effectiveness, that also included change-oriented behavior and externally focused or boundary spanning activities. And some of the behaviors here, sorry, are categorized here. And so we see under task orientation, it's about providing clarification, engaging in planning and monitoring and problem solving activities. Relationship-oriented activities include supporting and developing employees, providing recognition, and also empowering employees. Change-oriented activities include things like advocating for change, envisioning the change, encouraging innovation and experimentation, and facilitating collective learning. And then the external or boundary spanning activities include things like monitoring the external environment, developing networks, and also representing the organization. And as we like to do, we present things in categories, but in fact, there are some ways in which some of these specific behaviors actually tap into more than one aspect. So we can see that developing employees is partially related to relationships, but it also can support and assist employees in accomplishing their work tasks. Empowering, which is not just the delegation of activities, but also ensuring that employees have the knowledge, skills, ability, and resources to do their work, ensuring that they have a sense of self-efficacy. We can see how this also would support change-oriented behaviors. So these behaviors collectively are important for leaders to accomplish their role as a leader. And yeah, and I think the other piece that's important to acknowledge is the balance between these aspects. So leaders need to be thinking about all of these four areas. I'm going to talk about a couple of leadership theories now. And transactional and transformational leadership is perhaps one of the most studied aspects of leadership. And transactional leadership, specifically contingent reward, relates to an explicit exchange between leaders and followers in which the leader recognizes and reinforces desirable behaviors. And this might be related to what we might consider to be more traditional managerial behaviors. So if you do your job well, you'll be recognized and rewarded. Transactional leadership through management by exception also provides a corrective function. Transformational leadership, on the other hand, is proposed that is a theory that proposes that effective leaders actually transform their followers to go beyond what they thought they were capable of doing. Pardon me. And transformational leaders provide a compelling vision for the future. So this is inspirational motivation. They role model the desired behaviors. This is idealized influence. They show concern for the well-being of followers, which is individual consideration. And they provide challenges and developmental opportunities and interesting assignments. And this is an intellectual stimulation. In the past, some thought that transformational leadership was actually superior to transactional leadership, but more recently, it's been demonstrated that it's important to have a combination of active positive leadership. So, for example, combining contingent reward and transformational leadership, and that these are more effective when used in combination. And just as an example, Dr. Cheng-Kwan Zhao and I are currently working on a research study that has shown that transformational leadership actually influences the meaning that employees attach to their work, and that those managerial behaviors or more transactional aspects actually influence the link between work meaning and job performance, and that it is the combination that actually helps to improve employees' performance. So now I want to talk a little bit about leader-member exchange theory, and my own doctoral research included leader-member exchange theory. And this theory is different from many other leadership theories in that it doesn't focus on the behavior of the leader specifically, but rather on that dyadic relationship between a leader and a follower. And the theory states that the quality of social exchange between both members, the leader and the follower, can have positive effects for leaders, followers, and the organization. And so in relationships with high quality exchange, we see that there are higher levels of loyalty, affect or liking, professional respect, and contribution. And contribution is when both parties go beyond what would be expected of someone in that relationship. So they're willing to put in that extra effort. And what's really important about leader-member exchange is that both the leader and the follower are willing participants in the development of that relationship. And that is done through a series of interactions. What is interesting, or I think one of the things that is interesting about this is that transformational leadership and other positive leadership behaviors actually might serve as a currency of exchange. So leaders who are charismatic or dynamic, those who set out a compelling vision and model the ideal behaviors, those that show concern about the well-being and the development of their followers may actually attract followers who are interested in developing a more positive relationship. Leaders often can't develop high quality exchanges with all of their followers, but the process is in part achieved through the delegation of responsibilities or tasks. And both the attributions that the followers and the leaders make and the behavioral responses that occur. And I have this diagram here, which looks a bit complicated, but basically the characteristics of the leaders and the followers, there are a series of exchanges that the leader will delegate some task or responsibility to the follower. How the follower then responds to that, and the attributions that they make about the leader's motivations and the reasons why they're doing that influence how they respond. Then the assessment or the attribution that the leader makes about how the follower accomplished that and how they then respond to the follower. This interaction within that dotted box will then help determine the nature of the exchange that occurs. And these are not big dramatic changes. They can be small events, but over time, the relationship will either develop to a higher quality exchange, or it may not. And certainly in higher quality relationships, there's greater trust and loyalty. And as the relationship develops to a higher level of social exchange, which is quite distinct from economic exchange, there isn't that expectation that each activity will be rewarded or acknowledged. And as that relationship develops, there is less need for immediate or direct exchange. And so I know that if I do something for my boss and I'm willing to put that extra effort in, even if it doesn't get acknowledged or recognized in the short term, I'm confident that at some point in the future, my leader or my boss will either respond or will acknowledge the contribution or do something for me when I need something that will be done. Now, of course, there are costs in developing these relationships. There's an investment in time, but there are also benefits. Leaders can delegate greater responsibility and have higher performing employees. Followers have greater opportunity to develop and either and potentially gain promotions or new opportunities, challenging or exciting assignments. And then of course the organization benefits because there's greater performance overall. One of the things that's really important with this is that authenticity is key. And I talked about how attributions play a key role in the development of the social exchange. If the motivation for delegating, and there is a big distinction between delegating responsibility and dumping tasks on someone. I think if we, if that motivation is suspicious, then the relationship is unlikely to develop. Similarly, the attributions that are made about the follower's performance is also important. And as we know from attribution theory, the reasons we attribute somebody's performance, or the reasons we attribute somebody's performance to, can be varied, and sometimes those are about the person and sometimes they're about external factors. But in essence, with positive attributions and positive behavioral responses, the relationship develops. And these certainly, it takes time and it takes investment in order to accomplish that. And maybe I'll just pause here and see if there are any questions so far.
Thank you, David. I don't see any questions in the chat right now, but
Okay.
this is really interesting. And one of the questions that I'd like to pose to our audience, just for quiet reflection, or you can put your response in the chat, is when you think about and reflect on your own experiences when you were most engaged to go above and beyond or perform at a level you never thought possible, so to engage in organizational citizenship behavior, think about the leader or the leadership culture that inspired you. So what were the components of that environment that worked really, really well for you? And maybe jot that down to yourself or add to the chat, and we will carry on.
Thanks, Kelly. That's a great suggestion. The one aspect that has been central to my own research are individual differences. So some of the work that I've done is looked at the role of personality and emotions. So when we think of personality, we often think of the big five. There is some evidence that conscientiousness, agreeableness, and emotional stability are really important factors in the development of leaders and leader-member exchange. Emotions also play a critical role, and whether that be state or in the moment or longer term trait personality, trait emotional states, both of those play an important role. My own research has looked at the application of attachment theory in the workplace. And this is one of those theories that I had learned about as a clinician and thought it might have relevance in understanding work relationships. And basically this theory states that we all have a need for closeness to others. And based on our early experiences with caregivers, we develop attachment working models that can result in secure attachment. And this is where individuals appropriately seek support from others when they're in distress. And insecure attachment, where individuals are overly reliant on others and avoidant individuals who are overly self-reliant and avoid closeness with others as a way of protecting themselves. And we found that attachment, when it came to certain attitudes and behaviors that are more relationship focused, attachment actually predicted those outcomes and those behaviors over and above personality and affectivity. In my doctoral research, I found that attachment insecurity interfered with LMX development. And so this is how, individuals, based on their previous experiences and their characteristics and their disposition to relationships can influence relationships at work. And interestingly, what we found was that when individuals engaged in emotion regulation behavior, that mitigated the effects of attachment insecurity on the inhibition of relationship development. Interestingly as well, when both members, the leader and the follower, were more anxiously attached, they were able to develop a more positive or higher level of exchange quality. And this suggests that maybe relationships at work satisfy some attachment needs. So I did want to shift now and talk a little bit about citizenship behavior. As we talked about how relationships can positively influence employee citizenship behavior. And so organizational citizenship behavior, or OCB, can be focused either on the organization or it can be focused on individuals. And there are a wide range of behaviors that are beneficial to the organization that go beyond just specific task performance. And so when we talk about task performance, I mean, if you are a widget maker, your ability to make widgets. If you're in customer service, your ability to serve customers and do those core aspects of the job. Citizenship behavior, although is distinct from those task activities, does influence overall performance ratings, and that's an important consideration. So, here's some of the citizenship behaviors that we might see, and I did try and cluster them in groups that reflect the type of behavior. So at the top, you see some activities or some behaviors that are directed towards the organization: compliance with regulations, loyalty to the organization, being a good sport. We also see on the bottom left-hand side things like helping and altruism. And so this is an employee who will assist other coworkers complete their work if that person is behind. Being courteous and respectful. And then on the bottom right-hand side, we see citizenship behaviors that support change. And this is showing initiative, taking charge, engaging in self-development, and even expressing legitimate concerns, which actually can be very beneficial to the organization. Very quickly, I did some statistics here, but basically meta-analytic results have shown that LMX predicts OCD. So when leaders and followers have good relationships, the followers are more likely to engage in citizenship behaviors. And that this is in part because higher quality exchanges result in higher levels of job satisfaction and organizational commitment. There's also research that showed that transformational leadership also predicted citizenship behavior. This is also partially explained through the improvement of job satisfaction and commitment. But it also, this research showed that transformational leadership actually supports the development of higher quality relationships, and that relationship link to OCB is stronger than the attitudinal link. Maybe I'll just, we can talk more about that in the question and answer if, but I'll maybe move on. Kelly, did you have a comment or question?
Oh, I just wanted to comment because you can't see the chat, but wow, we've had a lot of really great engagement in the chat because people are really confirming what you've been saying, that, you know, when they reflect on their best leadership experiences or a leader that was very inspiring for them, they're talking about authenticity and trust and respect, and providing that leader provided them with a certain amount of autonomy so that they could have a little bit of control over their work. Acknowledgement goes a long way. I mean, it costs nothing and it goes a very long way. So everything in the chat really, and also transparency, I think, is another important notable theme that we're seeing in the chat. So all of this really, people's lived experience very much, I think, aligns with what you've just shared. So thank you.
Oh, no, that's great. And you know, if we think about the job characteristics model, the greatest motivating potential that a job can have is when we get feedback, when we have autonomy, when we can see how the work we're doing is significant and contributes to the bigger picture. And so, yeah, so that is not surprising. I did want to just spend a little bit of time because I said, you know, well, what does this mean? And now that we know that the importance of relationships in developing citizenship and the importance that citizenship has to organizations, you know, before COVID, 90% of organizations in Canada had less than 20% of their workforce working remotely. And we've seen a significant shift in this more recently. And, you know, with now more than half of organizations with more than half of their workforce working remotely. And, you know, this is likely to continue for a period into the future, but there's also some question as to whether or not this might significantly and permanently change some work relationships. You know, so because of that, I think it is important, as we all hope that we're moving out of the pandemic, we might still see that there are some long-term implications of that for leaders. Of course, even if we are working in the workplace, you know, the nature of our interactions has changed. Even if we're going into the office, you know, physical distancing requires us to behave differently. You know, there are, you know, using technology and making investments in training and technology can support that. And I think as we all probably in the last year have discovered that there are ways to connect and to accomplish some of building some of those relationships, even if we're working remotely. You know, it's also important to note that for some, working remotely has a lot of benefits. It works well with their family situation. It reduces their commute time. But for others, it can also lead to isolation and a loss of opportunities to develop or progress in their careers. So there are advantages and disadvantages, and often with that comes the extent or the amount of choice that that individuals have. So what are a couple things that leaders can do? I think the one key takeaway is we need to remember those leader essentials and that balance between, you know, responding to the task needs, the relationship needs, and the change-oriented needs. And one of the ways we can do that is looking for opportunities to interact with people and having an intentionality around that. It's still also important to, you know, provide, as a leader, to provide that vision, to continue to model those behaviors that you want your followers to see and to engage in. We also need to be concerned about our followers and provide them with opportunities that challenge them and stimulate them and provide them opportunities to develop. The one thing that is also really important is, while technology has been really beneficial, I think it's further eroded some of the boundaries that people have been able to maintain between their work and their home life. And so looking for opportunities to help and certainly to support employees and engaging healthy boundaries there. Communication is really important. And one of the things we want to do, though, is to avoid information overload through email. That actually causes more stress than it helps to relieve. We need to look for opportunities to provide feedback, arranging mini meetings, those impromptu meetings that we might have had in the hallway, arranging drop-in times, or arranging meetings with small groups of employees. We also want to continue to celebrate accomplishments and milestones, and support innovation and experimentation, and enabling people to come up with new ways of doing things safely. And I think with intention, look for opportunities to be inclusive, because often those who were sort of on the sidelines before we went remote, those are the people who suffer. And of course, all of this happens with some understanding of the experience and skill level of the individual employees. So with that, I think I will take a pause, and we'll maybe start chatting. And I'll maybe with that stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, David. That was a great overview, and certainly I think struck a chord with everybody on the line. We've had lots of chat. I want to ask you a question, and then I'm going to turn to some of the questions that have rolled in. So when I was a lot earlier in my career, and it was performance evaluation time, and it was my first really big leadership role. I remember my leader at the time taking me aside and saying, Kelly, you're really on task. I can do task. But she said, I really want you to focus on relationships right now. And that seemed odd to me, because that wasn't what I saw modeled, certainly a few years ago. It wasn't what we saw as a model of leadership. I thought my job was to deliver on task. I've later learned through, lots of difficult experiences, that it is all about the relationships. And we've certainly seen that through the pandemic, that the most resilient organizations are the ones where there were strong relationships to start with, and we were able to sort of weather the storm. So I guess my question to you is, picking up on the theme of pandemic and sort of the world of work post-pandemic, and imagining a more hybrid world of work, how are we going to go the distance to create those meaningful relationships in a hybrid, almost more complex work environment that we can't yet see? Any advice for us?
Yeah, well, and I certainly don't have all the answers, but I think the first step is intention, and I think the things that we sort of write down are the things that we focus on, or the things that we decide we're going to do intentionally, or where our attention goes. And that's really challenging for leaders and managers in organizations, because there is a lot of pressure on the task piece. That usually when the leader is being evaluated, they're being evaluated on, did we achieve our goals? Did we achieve certain objectives? So it's really easy, I think, for a lot of people to focus on that. I think it is that intention, though, to remember that balance, and to make a point of saying, I'm going to spend some time this week or this month connecting with people and arranging, and that often in this environment, I think pre-hybrid work relationships, we would walk down the hall, or you knew that eventually you would see somebody in the hallway or in the office, and that you would connect with them. I think setting up appointments is is one way to do that, and either in group or individual or some combination of that. I think just spending time with people and hearing about what their concerns are is really beneficial in terms of having the employees feel supported. Yeah.
Really important. And, a question that's coming up in the chat and also a suggestion is just the importance of onboarding now. So in this world of virtual work, we are now recruiting virtually and onboarding virtually, which, is really going to be a challenge for us to build those connections. Do you have any suggestions, or have you, observed some leading practices around onboarding that you think will be important for us to consider in the future?
Yeah, I think onboarding is probably more critical than any other time because, as I talked about, when there is a higher quality exchange that exists, you can go for longer periods of time without sort of recognizing, acknowledging, responding, and there is that level of trust that basically that the support is there, that the relationship is there, and that's really difficult with someone you've never met in person, or it's more difficult when you haven't met that person in face to face. And so I think the approach to take in that situation is, again, with intention, set up regular meetings and that be part of the onboarding. I think it is also important to introduce and create connections within the organization as well. And of course that differs, every organization is different in different sizes, but making sure that new people are connected to the new people are connected to other people within the organization as well. Because I didn't talk about it, but coworker exchange is also another important aspect. Having those connections with others in the organization is also really important.
And that is such a good point, because as our organizations become more complex, that resilience is going to happen at the team level, isn't it? Where people band together. I have another great question that's come up, so I'm going to throw this one your way. Do studies show that there's a hierarchy of citizenship behavior? Are some citizenship behaviors more important than others in developing higher quality relationships in the workplace?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And I think, it's interesting that what the research is showing is that there's actually a latent OCB construct, and that people who are likely to engage in one form of citizenship are more likely to engage in other forms of citizenship. So I don't know, I think that's interesting that we can assess very specific behaviors, but they all sort of tap into this larger sort of likelihood of engaging in those behaviors. I think the context would really determine which behaviors are more important to that organization. And I could, I don't know that there is a hierarchy. I've certainly never read anything about there being a hierarchy of behaviors, but certainly in some situations, I think if an organization was going through a change, they likely would value change-oriented citizenship more than if they were not going through a change. And certainly I've seen that where there is resistance to initiative and voice because the organization doesn't want to change anything, so they're not going to value that as much. Yeah.
You spoke earlier about the importance of setting a vision, and that is a great way that leaders engage and motivate people to something bigger. And I love this quote from Simon Sinek from his book, The Infinite Game, where he says, when we work hard for something we don't believe in, it's called stress. And when we work hard for something we do believe in, it's called passion.
Yeah.
And so harnessing that passion, because we have a superordinate goal, and certainly pandemic for some organizations represented that superordinate goal where everybody was going to band together. I'm curious about your thoughts about vision and the role it plays in leader-follower exchange and building those connections.
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think the value of vision is that it brings some clarity and helps everyone understand what the objectives are and what we should be working towards and how we might accomplish that. So I think in that respect, there's value in vision. I think when it comes to the development of relationships, I think when there is that compelling vision that people relate to, that becomes attractive, and that people say, I want to hitch my cart on that pony because I like where that's going, or I admire this person who is creating this vision, and I want to be associated with that person. And so that becomes that currency of exchange. And by I'm willing to do things for that person because they're going to then bring me into their association, which I think is how that happens. Uh, yeah, I mean, of course, if somebody's vision is unappealing, that won't work. Yeah, you could come up with the best vision that no one's interested in, then that's not going to have the same effect. Yeah, and I'm interested to know if you have any thoughts on that as well, Kelly.
So in all of my years working in organizational development and change, I've noticed that the organizations that tend to be able to rally that citizenship behavior are the ones that are very mission focused. So in education, for example, we just put the focus right on the students. So when we get lost in the weeds, it's, what's best for students. And I think that really helps to bring people together and, it's a superordinate goal. So it,
Right.
it hurdles all of the stickiness of day-to-day work and helps us function, towards our mission, towards our vision. So that's just been my observation, but and I'm sure there is research to support some of that. It's easier said than done. It's kind of simple, but not easy. But fascinating too to observe all the behavior during the pandemic. So there was a mission. We had to serve our students even during this time of disruption, and every organization faced a similar kind of big picture challenge that they could rally around.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that goes back to the question earlier about is there a hierarchy with citizenship behavior? And I think some of the signals that employees can receive is from the leader who provides that clear vision about how to, what behaviors will have a greater impact and benefit to the organization.
So we have another really good question from our audience, and that is that organizational structure is key to focus points within an organization. So structure lacks in many places before COVID, but do you think we'll see many companies or organizations review their structure so that more focus can be provided to personnel at all levels? So this is that sort of diffused leadership at every level, maybe.
Yeah, well, and I think it's important to recognize that there are leader roles within organizations that are labeled as leaders, usually manager, director, some title, but that leadership can be enacted whether or not you have a formal leadership role. In terms of the org structure, and this is not answering the question, but it reminds me of an important element, that one of the barriers to developing good exchanges with followers is that there isn't enough time. And if your span of control is so wide, if you have 100 people reporting to you or even 50, it's very difficult to get to know each person and really have the opportunity to develop that relationship and that exchange. And so that's an important consideration when thinking about an org structure, is that the span of control isn't so great that you can't have those relationships. And I mean, there are ways to accommodate that by putting in other levels and layers within the organization. In terms of whether or not I think organizations will change after, as a result of the pandemic, I don't actually know. I think, because I think as for every flat, diffuse organization, we can find examples of hierarchy. I think that those organizations that will be successful will understand the environment and match their structure to meet the needs of the environment and to meet the needs of the organization. But yeah, and Kelly, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that. Maybe that's.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I think about the power of teams. So there's some well-known research about how employees will trust information provided by their direct supervisor more so than somebody a couple of rungs up on the hierarchy. And so how do you build that resilience among teams? And another term that I'll introduce, which is a big feature of this conversation, is psychological safety. So more and more we're learning it's very hard to be creative and innovative if you feel like you're being chased by a tiger all the time. So how do we build in these resiliencies in among the team where there's good social reciprocal exchange, and that they're empowered to work at that level to build and be resilient? That's just something I'm curious about. I wonder if you have any ideas about that.
Yeah. I mean, well, it is. I mean, there's lots of evidence, and I think this is linked to the body of evidence on leader-member exchange, that that relationship with the direct supervisor is the most significant relationship in the organization. I think we also see that. Well, and this is not a necessarily a recent thing, but that the role of coworkers and teams is critical. I actually was reading an article this morning and just didn't have time because I literally received it in a listserv thing that actually talked about psychological safety and perceived organizational support, and how people were responding to COVID and the pandemic, and basically I think the takeaway from this article, at least in my quick read of it, was that it's more important now than ever for employees to feel that safety, that psychological safety, that especially in times when we're asking people to be innovative and do things differently and to try new things, there has to be that tolerance that things won't always go well. And if your response to things not going so well is to really come down on people, then what you will find is people will retreat, they'll stop innovating, they'll stop experimenting. And there are many different ways that organizations can support their employees. We most often see that direct supervisor as the agent of the organization, as the person who is representing the organization in our eyes. So making sure that people have the resources they need, making sure that we're checking in and seeing whether or not they are coping with this environment. I think those things are so critical and can have a huge impact. Just saying, can we have 15 minutes? I just want to check in with you. I don't have an agenda. I just wanted to see how you're doing right now. It's, that that type of intervention, or I mean, the intervention makes it seem almost like it's a manipulation, and it isn't. But that type of activity can have a profound impact on employees that you're reaching out and that you're showing your concern.
And I
Sorry,
think
I
it's
hope
so,
did I answer
yeah,
your question?
I
Okay.
think it's so wonderful that organizations are now sort of normalizing and taking mental health and wellness seriously, especially, you know, for managers. If you're leading people, you also have to engage in self-care, which is not selfish. We always have to remind ourselves, because you give so much and you are so time constrained if you're in a managerial role, that to really be intentional about the relationship building, it kind of starts with your own self-care. So I love that organizations are talking more about this, and it is more normalized than ever before. So maybe that could be a key takeaway, is for people to reflect on how they're looking after themselves so that they can look after their relationships. On that note, sadly, we could talk all day about this, David. I think we could carry on and keep pulling out some really interesting comments from this very engaged group of participants that we are so grateful to be sharing time with today. So on that note, I'm going to wrap it up. So a very special thank you to our speaker, Dr. David Richards, for joining us today. We appreciate you taking your time out of your very busy schedule to share your insights with us. I want to say that in lieu of a gift and in appreciation of your commitment to accelerating our students' success, Georgian College will be donating in your honor to an annual scholarship fund to be presented to a deserving Georgian or Lakehead University student. Today's event has been hosted by the Executive Leadership Program, brought to you by Lakehead University and Georgian College. This 3-day program is designed to produce long-term results for you and your organization. So if you enjoyed this session and you want more, there is a link in the chat to learn more about the program that is facilitated by leading faculty and delivered in the heart of Simcoe County. So you don't need to leave town to get this kind of leadership learning and to really grow your leadership and your personal development. This program builds on your real world experiences, analyzes your personal leadership style, and helps you improve your own impact and drive performance and culture within your organization. So we want to thank everybody for joining us today, and stay tuned for future offering. I would like to sign off now and thank everybody, and please take care and be well.